Welcome one, welcome all to a very special sort of weekend edition of a BTB Roundtable. My name is RJ Ochoa. You're watching this on the Blog of the Boys YouTube channel or listening on the Blog of the Boys podcast network. It is time to put together not a collective 53-man roster, but kind of a collective 53-man roster. This is kind of episode in a lot of different ways. Joining me are five fantastic BTBers from all over the world, all over the globe. If you're watching the 12 o'clock position, you know him, you love him. He starred in Days of Our Lives for 12 years running, the one and only Tom Ryle on Twitter at Tom Ryle BTB. The top right sector, not quadrant, because there are six of us, is occupied by the man, the myth, the legend. You know him from Chop Sports. He doesn't ever sleep. I'm very certain. He is always working. He's always grinding. He's always hustling or spending time with his beautiful family. On Twitter at Dave Sturchio, it is the one and only Dave Sturchio. Bottom right sector, we have now residing in the heart of America, Oklahoma country, baby. All right. I don't know how many Dallas Cowboys jerseys he has, but he brings a different one each and every time, so we know where his budget is being spent. You can read him, of course, on the fabulous pages at blogoftheboys.com. It is David Howman on Twitter. Bookending DH44 with some underscores. Always makes it difficult to type. Got to be honest with you, Howman. I don't love it when we do different things, but, just for you to chew on. Bottom middle portion, 6 o'clock. Top left part of our country, Danny Phantom, not the cartoon, although definitely the inspiration for the name. He can tell you that story on his own time on Twitter, Danny Phantom24. Dan, you hear him every Friday on the Star Seminar with Rabble Rouser, two of BTB's finest fellows. Finally, bottom left quadrant sector, whatever. This is a lot of introductions. Tony Catalina doesn't watch anything, doesn't eat anything. I don't know how he is a person with opinions or tastes or whatever. So, Tony, what do you enjoy in life other than the Dallas Cowboys?
Being miserable about the Dallas Cowboys. That's part of it.
Okay. Well, Sturch, we haven't had you on a roundtable in a while. You were very anxious to be a part of today. We're all going to go through our 53-man roster predictions. There's going to be a lot of crossover, of course, and we're going to, kind of put together, discuss, debate. You were the one who said we had to make fun of each other, actually, in the chat as we were preparing for this. Look, I know I can exaggerate some things, but I think everyone would kind of agree. You said that.
No.
Are you ready are you ready to roast somebody? That was your word of choice.
No, here's the thing. No. First of all, Tom was the one that came out and said, "Hey, based off of last night's game, and if you're watching this, we're talking about Friday night's game." He was talking about how he would have made some adjustments based off of a couple things that they kind of tipped their whatever, I'm talking about, showed their hand, I guess. And I said, nope, too late, time to roast you. Like, I was obviously being a little bit of a jokester there. I don't want anybody get hurt feelings here, or anybody watching this say like, oh my God, everybody gang up on Tom. I do find it entertaining, but I don't plan on doing that today.
Danny, do you buy that, or do you think there's a lot of ill will and bad blood circulating here?
I do buy that. Sturchio, he seems like a genuine guy, and although Tom does leave himself out there, so I would be lying if I said I didn't have my moments where I'd take a shot at my good buddy there. So sorry about that there, Tom.
Howman, last time we spoke in a roundtable fashion, you had made a pitcher of sweet tea. Have you gone the sun tea route yet, or since then?
Not yet, because the weather's just been it's been fickle the last few weeks. But I did make another pitcher of regular sweet tea, so okay. I've got that for a little bit.
This is riveting stuff, by the way.
It really is. Let's go ahead and get to the 53-man roster predictions. If you're listening on the Blog on the Boys podcast network, you obviously cannot see these. We'll definitely write about this at blogontheboys.com, so you can go see everybody's there. Tom, we start with yours. This is Tom Ryle's final 53-man roster prediction. To be fair to everybody here, myself included, look, we all have schedules. It was difficult. We put this together prior to Friday night's game. So, Tom, you were the person who was most concerned about the ramifications of that game and kind of what it said or will say about your roster. But the highlights, give us, please, the things you struggled with the most, the things maybe you're proudest of. The floor is yours.
Yeah, first off, right off the bat, I think I got the backup quarterback wrong because they gave every indication that Cooper Rush has the job. And furthermore, Will Grier didn't do a thing to make any change to that. For me, it was almost more about the numbers, though, at some of these positions. Like wide receiver, I felt like you got to go deep because you know you're not going to have Michael Gallup. And you've got to have a place for Cavante Turpin, who technically he should be under special teams. I just had him under wide receiver because they're going to show up. It's just like CJ Goodwin shows up as a specialist here, but he's going to be listed as a cornerback on the roster.
Right, but just to be clear, Tom,
thing.
We're looking at this through the prism of what it will actually be. And if you're watching this, you can see that we don't have Tyron Smith as an example. We know the Cowboys are going to carry him on their initial 53-man roster. But again, we know, Tom, we all kind of talked about this. They're not going to carry, in all likelihood, initially Brian Anger, Brett Maher, Jake McQuay. They're going to cut all three of them to create 3 roster spots, do some roster gymnastics. We're forecasting a little bit. We're kind of looking at what the roster is going to look like, Sunday, September 11th, when they get ready to host the Bucs.
Yeah, there will be some people released that obviously are going to be back within a day or two, and this is hopefully was trying to look forward to what they'll have on September 11th when they kick off the season, and I still think they're going to wind up going deep at wide receiver and short themselves at running back and or tight end. I picked for them to short it at running back. Again, I think probably Rico Dowdle is going to actually be on instead of Malik Davis, unless they go for. I just don't see this happening. Peyton Hendershot, I think, did a really good job improving his value to the team. They could just go with 3, but given the fact that there are some, shall we say, little questions about pass protection and who's going to be doing that, they could well need to rely on a lot of 12 personnel to put some extra protection out there. So that might incline them to bring Hendershot in to help with that. Specialist, yeah, we all know who's there. Now, the offensive line is the big issue.
Well, I want to talk about Peyton Hendershot, Tom.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert, we're going to go through everybody's, but Danny Phantom, you were the only person here who did not have Peyton Hendershot on your 53-man roster. Is it just a matter of sometimes you have to cut good players, and you struggled with it, you're upset about it, but ultimately he just didn't make the cut?
Yeah, precisely that, RJ. I still go back and forth with it. I think he's the toughest one, for all my choices I made, and I think it's really comes down to I think he's played well, and a lot of fans have really kind of gravitated towards his play and the excitement that he brings and the potential that he has, and I could definitely see him being like a talent that they'd want to stash, but I don't think he's an immediate contributor, and I think he kind of falls in the category of a guy that we all expect to make it, but then surprisingly doesn't. And I could definitely, think they're going to try to get him on the practice squad. The only question that really I have about that decision is I'm not really sure the health of Sean McKeon, and I don't know exactly what's going on. So if there's any situation where Schultz and Ferguson are only 2 tight ends they have, then I feel like they're probably going to look to bring back, the Sprinkles health to bring him back, or just find somebody else that they could fill in. So that's why, to me, I left Hendershot off my 53.
Tom, we're going to obviously talk about this roster as a whole as we cycle through everybody. So I'm going to ask each of you this because we're going to move on to Sturch's right now. But if you had to pick, Tom, if you had to make a cut, right now you had to bring somebody back or make way. By the way, we all, I think, have free agent listed as an offensive lineman because we all believe the Cowboys are going to add somebody some way, somehow. But Tom, who's your 53rd guy right now? If you have to create a roster spot today based off of this roster, who's the one you're cutting?
Josh Wall.
Wow. I don't think we can disagree. Okay, Dave Sturchio, you are up next. Do you want to give us any sort of preface before we put your 53-man roster on the screen?
I think based off Friday night's games, I took a look right before this at the snap counts, right? And I know it's preseason game 3, so you really can't take too much consideration to that, but you do when it comes to fringe players and guys that were kind of down on for the first 2 weeks. Nahshon Wright played 100% of the snaps, every single down. Nahshon Wright was out there, and then he kind of saved his back end a little bit with some good plays. And I was on the fringe with him the entire preseason. And while I'm a big fan of him, the person, I just felt like he wasn't gonna with the emergence of a Deron Bland, and I wasn't sure if he was gonna be on this roster. I was very curious, but he did make my final roster as a cornerback. No, he didn't, according to this graphic. So,
It was a confusing thing. To be fair to everybody here, I will take the blame for that. Look, there's a production part of this, Sturch. You know that very well from your daily life. We had to have graphics ready and things like that. But we're here to add and apply context. So maybe you do have Nashawn Wright. He had the interception. Maybe that sways your mind on Friday night against. So you have Nashawn Wright. So the podcast audience didn't see your slip up.
Well, podcast audience, I've always had Nashawn Wright. So
right.
That's another thing. Other things that kind of jump out at me while you said everybody's in agreement with a free agent. I am also down on Josh Ball, but he does make my roster because of the lack of depth. So that's why I just feel like, okay, he's gonna be there. And for whatever reason, I think one of the biggest highlights of Friday night's game was when they threw it down to Nate Newton, and Michael Irvin tried his very best to talk up Josh Ball, and Nate Newton just wasn't having it. He was just like, nah, listen, man, he's not doing very well. But he's going to make the roster, and that was one of my fringe guys as well. My MVP of the entire preseason is probably Izzy, our safety. I think he played incredibly. Every time he was out there, he was making plays. So he makes the roster as well. Nothing else jumps out. I think I might be one of a few of the guys that bring on John Ridgeway. I think that he's like a Brent Urban like replica almost, but on the cheap. And he's just the size and a run stuffer, and his size is just incredible. So I have him on my roster. And of course, Hendershot at the very end really showed me something in the final quarter of that game last night, where he could be the fourth tight end. Now, bringing on 4 tight ends, that's almost like a little, not sacrilege by any chance, but like the special teams really needs a lot of bodies. And I know a lot of these guys found themselves on special teams last night. I don't understand we're always worried, and I'm one of the critical ones, like Dak needs reps. And a lot of the guys are like, hey, you're out of your mind. Right. But then like, I'm looking at him like, all right, so based off of last week, when we watched Kevontae Turpin absolutely destroy it on special teams, he's out there playing receiver last night. And I'm like, whoa, can we put him in bubble wrap, please? Like, if this is going to be our first good kick returner in 25 years, please, just settle down with that. But he'll make the team. The defensive, the wide receiver room is kind of deep because of, just like Tom said before, because of the injury to Michael Gallup. I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but this might be one of those situations where a guy is added as a wide receiver from free agency. I know it's late, but it's like, I feel like there could be some veteran presence that's needed and injected into this lineup. It's just a want over what they'll actually do. But like I said, I've been banging on the door for like T.Y. Hilton or something like that, but I don't see him working that out. But outside of that, I think it's everybody that's on this roster has made themselves, definitely expendable. Like, let's not get rid of them. I think the one difference that I have here is I wasn't very big on Harper. I understand that he didn't get the playing time that everybody else did, but when you're looking at these linebackers, and at one point before we signed Anthony Barr and before we knew about the health of Jabril Cox, you kind of looked at the linebackers as like, outside of Micah, what are we going to get out of Leighton? What are we going to get out of Luke Gifford? You know what I mean? So I was waiting for somebody to step up, and Harper just didn't for me. But again, if he makes the team, I'm not mad at it.
So a few things here, Sturch, and I want to talk about one part of your roster. But first of all, you were not the only person who left Devin Harper off of their 53-man roster. The other person is your paisan, Tony Catalina. So the two of you hate Devin Harper the most. But that being said, on the subject of hating people, we all did carry Michael Gallup, just so everybody's aware, because the Cowboys, Jerry Jones said this past week that they're not going to be placing him on the PUP list, which means they will be carrying him on the 53-man roster. He'll just be inactive, obviously, until they're ready for him to play. But on the subject of people that we all did carry, all of us, except for one of us, carried Josh Ball on their roster. The one, of course, David Howman. Again, these were all due prior to Friday night's game, which I don't think improved Josh Ball's stock by any means. Now, Howman actually did sneak a change in during the game. It was not at tackle, but shout out to him for being cunning enough to get that done. But Howman,
we have a cheat code.
Look, it was manageable at that time. But I want to come back to something on Sturch's roster, but this is kind of a topic du jour, David. Why did you leave Josh Ball off? Because I think we all, the other 5 of us, I think Sturch said it well, we're carrying him because the Cowboys don't have a lot of options.
Well, I think that for me, the reason that I ended up coming down on them getting rid of him, one had to do with Matt Waletzko coming back and playing, which I was actually kind of surprised. I didn't think that he was going to be able to make it in this game. But also there's still some options at tackle on the free agent market right now. And there's going to be some more options once every other team gets through their final cuts. And most of those guys probably won't be starting caliber. They're not going to be someone that comes in and starts at left tackle in place of Tyron Smith, but it'll be someone that will offer them depth and could very easily be an upgrade over Josh Ball. And I just think last year when Josh Ball was a rookie and they kind of stashed him on their IR pretty quickly, and obviously he didn't play it all last year. So with the season the preseason that Ball has had, I don't think that they're necessarily worried that if they do cut him, they won't be able to get him on their practice squad again and kind of stash him for another year while they work on that development. So I think that's what they'll go with.
That's wise. Howman's playing chess while we're all playing checkers. That's why all of you asked to get a change done to your roster. You didn't ask at the right time. He did. So kudos to him in that sense. Sturch, one last thing before we move on to Tony's 53. You are the only person here. So spoiler alert, as we're kind of going through all these, you're the only person who carried 4 running backs. The rest of us made a choice between Rico Dowdle or Malik Davis. Some people went one way, some people went the other. You're carrying 4 tight ends. You're carrying 4 running backs. You're carrying 7 wide receivers. That's a lot of bodies. Do you really think it's necessary to carry both Rico Dowdle and Malik Davis? We all love them both, so nobody come at us. We all love them both, but do you really think it is necessary, given that this is a team who, to your own admission, is going to feed Zeke, and whatever is even kind of left over, hand off to Tony Pollard?
Here's my explanation for that, and same thing for the tight end actually. So Dalton Schultz is playing on a franchise tag, right? So we don't know the status of Dalton Schultz going forward. So you want to keep every possible tight end on the roster to make sure that you could see what they do. That's where I'm leaning with Zeke and Pollard. Nobody's gonna preach for Zeke and scream from the mountaintops about Zeke more than I am, right? But the fact is the facts. Next year's cap hit is massive. And if he doesn't produce the way that they expect him to produce, Zeke might find his way out of Dallas. Same thing with Tony Pollard. He's a free agent. Now, I understand that, Stephen Jones went out there and said, we want him on the roster, blah, blah, blah. But we've seen this team and this front office let marquee players walk out the door with us just going absolutely nuts, tearing our hair out. So for that reason, I need to see more of the following backups throughout the course of the year. Even if they're small splash plays, you got to see something what you got. You can't see that in a practice squad. You can't see that kind of stuff there. You can't see that during the weekend prep when they're walking through things. These guys got to be ready to play as a pro in the pro level, at the pro level on Sundays. And like I said, I don't foresee them getting all the snaps in the world, but if they can work them into special teams or just get them on the field, get them familiar within the system, and have them in the meetings and everything like that, because you just don't know what this Dallas Cowboys front office is going to do. I don't like it. I don't like carrying 4 running backs, but I know what this front office just did to us at tackle and at defensive end and at all these other positions where they let guys just walk out and we're like, well, we have these guys behind us and they're just as good. I'm like, all right, well, we need to find out. We all like Rico. We all like Malik. We all think that they ran very hard and very well this preseason. But again, they're running hard and well in the preseason versus 3rd stringers, 4th stringers. Guys are going to be bagging groceries at Stop and Shop next week. That's the kind of situation that they were put in. But now I need to see them against some ones at some point. Not like I said, don't work them into the game plan, but when they need a spell and Pollard, comes up gimping or Zeke is just tired, you're going to need somebody else. And I think we're going to have to evaluate these guys just based off the cap stuff next year. And I hate looking forward to next year. Trust me.
Danny, before we move on to Tony's roster, something that Tom has said before, I know Tom's written about this at the site, is Rico Dowdle and Malik Davis are sort of proof, all due respect to everybody involved here, at how not difficult it is to find running backs to utilize in the future. So while Sturch's argument is logical and makes sense, right? I want to hold on to these guys for the future. I don't know what 2023 will bring from a depth standpoint. Is there not an argument on the other side of that coin to say, well, who cares? It wasn't hard. We found these guys, without even trying. We'll just do it again. Let's maximize this roster in the here and now for the sake of 2022.
Yeah, there is, and you just did it. I think that I'm not going to really spend a lot of time talking about protecting a couple undrafted guys that we're impressed with right now, because the Cowboys could totally. I understand Sturt's point, and absolutely right. We don't know what's going to happen with running back, and it'd be nice to have some people under contract that we have some bodies. But I think they could, with the running back position, you could just turn around and hit the reset on day 3 of next year's draft and find a couple guys that we like just as well as Rico and Malik right now. So to me, I mean, I think they're going to keep Rico because they like Rico. But I'm in my roster, as much as I do like Malik Davis, I'm not holding a roster spot for him. There's just there's too many spots we got to fill.
Sure. Okay, Tony, let's look at yours now. Sturch mentioned John Ridgway. He's gone for you. No Dennis Houston for you at wide receiver. You did go Cooper Rush. You went 3 running backs. You went 4 tight ends. You kept C.J. Goodwin. That's another kind of point of debate. You also have a free agent listed again. That's kind of a very popular thing. You went with 6 corners. You did not cut either Nashawn or Kelvin Joseph. Is there anything here that you feel proud of? Maybe it is leaving Devin Harper off of it.
Honestly, Devin Harper was one of the tougher decisions I made, but I think the toughest decision I made, based on everything we hear and the way Dak Prescott talks about him, was leaving Dennis Houston off. I think that's where the Cowboys are going to get super creative. I was just trying to thinking about it in a game day sense. There's a real possibility, right? You look at CeeDee Lamb is definitely obviously going to play. Jalen Tolbert is going to be active. Kavontae Turpin's going to be active. And Noah Brown's going to be active, right? So there's 4 wide receivers. On game day, are they going to dress 5? If they dress 5, right, that puts Simi Fehoko. So Dennis Houston's going to be a game day inactive anyway. And we already know Michael Gallup, with him being on the roster, is going to be a game day inactive anyway. So I wonder if there's a way they could sneak Dennis Houston through the practice squad, because I do see value and I do understand that Dak likes him. So that one was probably the hardest decision I made. I also kind of looked at the Malik Davis situation, like Sturch said. I think Malik Davis has done enough to earn a job on a 53-man roster, and I would love to see it be here. I think he holds value, and ultimately it comes down to special teams. I don't think the Cowboys are going to make that decision. I think Rico Dowdle is that guy, and I think he's earned it as well. But Malik Davis, I was impressed with him all preseason. Where for me, the cornerbacks is why I kind of stood pat on this. Was I think they don't like giving up on guys too early. I think Kelvin Joseph being a 2nd round pick with talent, they want to try to see that investment through. I think Nashawn Wright is a damn good special teams player, and I think they value that, especially with John Vossel having the voice that he does within that coaching staff. So there are some things here that I really struggled with. I think safety is super deep. I mean, Marquise Bell had to make this team. Izzy Mukuamu did everything he had to do to earn that roster spot. And the Devin Harper thing to me was another one of those guys where I'm hoping like other teams kind of like just don't notice it and that he could slip through the practice squad, because again, thinking about John Fossil, and that's what a lot of these back end 53-man roster guys you have to think. And the fact is, I think Lou Gifford is good on special teams. We saw him against the Patriots, block a punt. We've seen him make plays in special teams, which is super important. And for me, that's kind of where the most of the struggle is. I think early on I was camp Will Grier. He just didn't do enough to separate himself in my opinion. And I know RJ, I feel a lot of the same way that you do. I think Will Grier is exciting. I think he brings a different element. I think it was just a case of injury kind of messing up the progression. I think it was just a little too late there. And so I think they just go the safe option with Cooper Rush. They know that they won a game with him. He can manage the offense. But so for me, going through all these positions there, I feel like there's a ton. I think you go through every section of this roster and really have a question mark about 1 or 2 different spots, which, I don't really envy the Cowboys in trying to make these decisions, because they're absolutely going to cut some people that are going to end up on rosters that are going to make an impact somewhere else.
That's all really well said. I think we've all kind of covered the Will Grier thing. I think we all think the Cowboys are going to lean Cooper Rush. I do want to I forgot, Sturch, to ask who your 53rd player was. So who is it off the top of your head? Is it one of the running backs? Maybe I would, especially after hearing kind of the discussion we just had.
Give me Davis as a 53rd.
Tony, who was your 53rd player here? You have to move on from somebody.
Yeah, that's super tough. I guess just the way it shakes out for me, it would probably be Hendershot. I think Hendershot
over one of the corners, because you're carrying 6 corners and CJ Goodwin. So you're carrying 7 corners.
I think CJ Goodwin is good at his job. I think that he's not going to go anywhere. That's just my personal opinion on that. And I think they like the fact that the cornerbacks are athletic. I think they think that Nashawn Wright is better than what he showed this preseason. I think what he had in practice and training camp is more indicative of what they think he has. And I don't know if they're ready to give up on Kelvin Joseph. And you can't blame Deron Blanford making the most of his opportunities. So that for me, that was a really tough situation.
Tom, you left Nashawn Wright off of your 53-man roster. There's some logic, and this was my logic personally. I left CJ Goodwin off of my team and carried Nashawn Wright to kind of supplement things that way. I mean, what do you feel like Kelvin has an edge over him? I mean, and by the way, we're recording this Saturday morning. We haven't mentioned this yet. Kelvin Joseph left the game, was ruled out with a concussion. We have no idea, what factor that's going to play into all of this. We certainly hope he's feeling better. But Tom, your thoughts on the Joseph Wright kind of plight that the Cowboys find themselves in?
Well, you just brought up the thing I wanted to mention, that Joseph has a concussion, and the Cowboys have been known to do, shall we say, creative things with injuries. If this is a case where the two are very close in their minds, and I think they probably are, I think that Deron Bland has actually separated himself. And so those two guys are probably competing for the same spot, that being Wright and Joseph. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe the Cowboys do a little IR manipulation with Joseph, buy him some time, get a chance to see what they've got with Wright. And then, they can always bring Joseph back, and I don't think they'd have any trouble getting Wright through to the practice squad, unless he had played so well that they decided that Joseph's IR problems were just going to linger forever. So,
well, if Joseph's on IR, they need Wright. I mean, that's part of the problem
that's
too.
What I'm saying.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. But they can have him on RI when he's doesn't really have to be. They've played that kind of game before.
Tom, I know we're talking about Tony's roster here, but something that I noticed about yours is you left Terrell Basham off of the defensive end group, and only one other person did that, and that was David Howman. A lot of people, Howman, have thought that the Cowboys would have to, maybe not have to, but would ultimately choose between Dante Fowler or Terrell Basham. You have made that Sophie's choice. Your thoughts on, we haven't talked about the defensive end group at all here. I mean, you're actually kind of going light. We'll get to your roster in just a bit, but you don't need Terrell Basham. You find him to be worthless, apparently.
Well, that was probably one of the harder ones that I made in my roster prediction, because I've been a huge Basham fan since the Cowboys brought him in. I thought he was really quietly effective last year. But they've got a lot of bodies on the edge right now. And if you also consider that, Chauncey Golston, I know they want to play him more inside, but he can play outside. He's still listed as a defensive end. You've got Micah Parsons, who's going to play on the edge a lot. And then you've also got Anthony Barr, who can play on the edge in certain sub packages. So they have some tough decisions to make. And for me, it came down to kind of a three-way decision between Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler, and Basham. And my thought process there was, the Cowboys have shown that they like to stick with their homegrown talent, which means Dorrance is probably safe. And Dante Fowler has that previous connection with Dan Quinn, having played for him back in college at Florida and then also with the Falcons. So I think at that point, Basham just becomes the odd man out, even though it would be just a tough decision to make.
I know you said the name Dorrance Armstrong, but I know that you meant Randy Gregory, at least if we follow the logic of Stephen Jones. Sturch, in the chat, you said you have a Terrell Basham point, so stand on the table for your dude if that's what you're going to do. Or maybe just smite him down if that's what you want to do as well.
No. It's pretty simple to me. There was very noticeable things on the sidelines, and what I saw was the nicest, biggest TB piece on his necklace when he had no pads on. So Basham is a lock. He's on this team. If Mike McCarthy and his staff and Dan Quinn and all those guys were kind of on the fringe with a couple of guys, they would have played. They would have played last night with a little bit of more evaluation. The fact that this guy's on the sidelines hanging out with the defensive ends DeMarcus Lawrence and whatnot, I feel like he's a lock on this team. That's the only reason. It's almost I come from the pro wrestling world. We call that a spoiler alert. So the fact that he wasn't dressed at all last night, he was just kind of hanging out, leads me to believe that Basham's on this team.
I do think he's getting a little bit of the benefit of being a notable part of a really successful team that this coaching staff oversaw. You can call it the George Selvey treatment. You know what I mean? I don't mean to put Terrell Basham in that box, but it is what it is. Tony, thank you for your 53-man roster prediction. Danny Phantom, let's take a look at yours. You have, there's a lot of chalk here. We all have a lot of crossover. We all have a lot of similarities, obviously. You are going very deep at linebacker. You're carrying 6 linebackers. You're carrying both Devin Harper and Luke Gifford. A lot of us made a choice there. Do you really feel like both are necessary, given, obviously, the fact that it's very top-heavy? Maybe you feel like there's a lot of pass rushing happening between Micah Parsons and Anthony Barr that makes that necessary.
Do I feel it's necessary? No. Do I think the Cowboys do? Yes. The linebacker spot is one of those positions that it's easy to kind of forget about. That the Cowboys, they rely on that as part of their core special teams, and they do go deep. They had 7 last year, I believe, and when you look at the bottom guys, you got basically they fall in 2 categories. They're either some development guy that you want to protect, or it's some player that contributes in some manner, whether it's part of on offense or defense or on special teams. And I think Luke Gifford and Harper have been playing well. I think uh, Devin Harper has done everything that you could expect for. I mean, we had some question marks about him, um, but I think he's been playing well as a linebacker. I think he had a team high in tackles last night. So I did go long at linebacker because I think that's what the Cowboys are going to do. But I mean, to me, there's not a lot of difference between these bottom guys. But I just think that it's a position that's important that we often overlook.
So do you think, because the stark difference between your roster and kind of the field here is you're the only person who carried 6 linebackers, and you're the only person who didn't carry Peyton Hendershot. So who is your 53rd player? Is it maybe one of the linebackers? Like if you had to keep, say, if somebody said, Danny, you have to keep Peyton Hendershot on your roster or else, all right, who are you making, who you go into to make room for that?
Well, if it's my choice, it would be one of the linebackers. But my actual 53rd person is, and we were just talking about him, is Basham. And the reason it's Basham, and I have him, I think he makes the team. But I think if you look at the all the edge rushers they have, I'm trying to understand his overall value because for a couple of things, Sam Williams played out of his mind last night. He had a great game. He was all over the place. I mean, he had some mental mistakes that we would like to not see, but as far as just effort and talent, I mean, he played well. So we're going to want to get that guy on the field. Fowler to me is, I mean, it's an easy decision between him and Basham. Fowler's been playing, a higher level, and then of course Armstrong's a no-brainer, and then we have Tank, and of course we also know that Micah and Barr are going to be, attacking from the edge at times. So where did these snaps come from? And you hear that term progress stopper, and Basham, just to me, as good as he is, he's roster worthy. He's just one of those guys that I feel like you just don't want to give reps to because there's so many other players. So that's why Basham is my 53, my last player. If you're going to cut someone to make room, it would be him.
We have a very interesting thing to talk about when we get to Howman's 53-man roster prediction. I think he knows what it is, but I don't want to spoil that. So, a position group we haven't talked about a lot. Danny, on your 53-man roster, you do have at defensive tackle 5 players. You have Neville Gallimore, Osa Odigizua, Quentin Bohanna. We all agree there. Chauncey Golston, we all agree there. You have Tristan Hill. Some of us carried both Tristan Hill and John Ridgway. Howman, you did that. I think, Tom, you did not do that. I did that, though. But there were only 2 people here who did not carry Tristan Hill at all, and they are the Paisans, Dave Sturchio and Tony Catalina. And in fact, Tony hates the big boy so much that he didn't carry Tristan Hill or John Ridgway. So Tristan Hill, I think a lot of us think, kind of played himself back into a roster spot. We all agree there was a lot of question marks about it as camp began. But Tony, defend yourself. I mean, geez, like you don't have anybody here. Like, are you just counting on the good times rolling with everybody else the whole time?
Yeah, I mean, I like the value that John Ridgway brings, and I think Tristan Hill is a tough guy. I mean, I think if you're going to have Tristan Hill on this team, I think he brings the tenacity I think people really appreciate. I think Dan Quinn kind of likes his edge. Sometimes it's gotten him in trouble. We've seen that happen before. But for me, I could conceivably see Tristan Hill not on this 53-man roster. I think ultimately the way we kind of did this exercise was, who do we think is going to be the 53-man roster when it shakes out? Now, initially, I could see Tristan Hill being on this team, but I think he's a perfect trade piece to try to get something else that we may need. I think if he can be moved for a tackle, I think if he can be moved for a wide receiver, because this could be a championship defense, and I don't think I'm outlandish by saying that. I think this defense has a championship opportunity, but this offense is not of that caliber. I think that's the problem with tackle, and that's the problem with receiver right now.
Is anybody here surprised, and anybody interject if you want, to learn that none of us carried Carlos Watkins? 0 for 6. Is anybody shocked by that? Like, is anybody stunned, or is that kind of because just as for context, not context, but in our live show following the game that I was doing on the channel and the podcast network, there were a lot of questions like, hey, how many people you think are going to be carried here, there, wherever? And in talking about defensive tackle, there were a few questions like, hey, RJ, you're not going to carry Carlos Watkins. So there are some people who think he deserves a roster spot, but nobody carried him.
Yeah. I think the two names that I don't miss much, but the two names that I haven't heard much about at all this camp has been Dorrance Armstrong and Carlos Watkins.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
So for me, Dorrance Armstrong is secure. I just hope that means he's silently been doing his job. But Carlos Watkins has been MIA this whole offseason. This whole
Sturch,
camp.
You had a thought there, but you did carry John Ridgway. You did not carry Tristan Hill. So again, I mean, maybe it's just, and I get Tony's point. And I think a lot of Cowboys fans have suggested that, but like, what market is there for Tristan Hill? He's in the final year of his rookie contract. He's had maturity issues.
Where's Rod Marinelli, defensive coordinator now?
Yeah.
Because that's exactly why I don't think Tristan Hill makes his team, is because as much as he's, quote, played his way back onto the roster, he doesn't have the Dan Quinn, Mike McCarthy thumbprint that everybody else kind of does on this team. I mean, while you inherit guys like DeMarcus Lawrence and the that's pretty much it as far as the defense is concerned. But like, you look at Tristan Hill, and while he did play well this preseason, and there's no taking that away, and maybe he did play well enough to be a practice squad guy or to be a somebody else's 52nd. I don't know, whatever the case may be. I just feel like I don't want to say it like he doesn't belong, but he doesn't fit the mold right now. That's my gripe with Tristan Hill.
Yeah,
Tom, before Howman sets this thing on fire, you had a defensive tackle point.
Yeah, I was just saying that the idea that I think Tony was floating about, are the Cowboys looking to trade some of these guys and trying to do a little showcasing sometimes? Because you look at like Hill, Watkins, and also you can look at Gallimore. All three of those guys were there for just a little bit last night, and I don't know what that means exactly. What's
it means they're on the team, Tom.
Huh? Yeah.
That means they're on the team, really.
Yeah. Well, I would think that a few snaps, just, because they had to have bodies out there or something or whatever. That's why I'm wondering, are they also trying to make sure there at least is some tape out there for people that might be interested in these guys? I would love to see the Cowboys try to move one or two of these, what I think are not excess, not surplus, but bounty of defensive linemen. They've got guys that are capable of filling a job on NFL rosters all over the league, and I think they've got more than they can manage to keep. I'm looking. I think I went with 9 just because I was trying to find spots for elsewhere, but even if you go 10, 11, there's still somebody you're leaving off that you're going kind of like, oh.
All right. Sometimes when you do this exercise, when you kind of put together a 53-man roster prediction, there are oversights. I think we all kind of agree. Like, you all, again, had some sort of like, wait, I didn't mean to do this, whatever. I'll fess up. I haven't put mine up on the screen yet, but I left Marquise Bell off of mine. So if it's an oversight, accident, he's on my 53. He's my version of Nahshon Wright for you, Sturch. What I'm about to show you all from David Howman is not an oversight. He wrote about this actually recently at bloggingtheboys.com, took some heat for it on twitter.com when the article went out. He does not have Leighton Vander Esch on his 53-man roster, David Howman. So Howman, the floor is yours. Defend yourself.
All right. So like you said, I wrote about this actually before this last preseason game. And the more I think about it, the more that it makes sense to me as a possible move that they're going to make. And one reason is with Leighton Vander Esch, you're looking at a guy that really he's not going to play much on special teams. So if you're getting value out of him, it's going to be on the field as a starter. So they've already got, obviously Micah Parsons is going to play a lot. Jabril Cox is going to play a lot. And then you bring in Anthony Barr, ideally because you're going to have him play a lot too. So where are those snaps coming from for Vander Esch? I think that they're looking at that and see that, maybe he's not going to end up playing much, which is why I ended up bringing Devin Harper onto the roster, because he can be that special teams player while also providing some good depth at the actual linebacker position. But similarly, I went 5 deep at safety with what I'm looking at there is Jaron Kearse and Marquise Bell, both of whom we know last year with Kearse, he kind of played a safety linebacker hybrid, playing a lot in the box at the line of scrimmage. And I don't see any reason why they wouldn't keep him in that same role. And so far through training camp and preseason, we've seen Bell in a very similar role, kind of almost playing like backup to Kearse's role. So I think that the Cowboys could look at that and say, we've got Parsons, Cox, and Barr as our linebackers, and then Kearse and Bell can also be that kind of linebacker safety hybrid. So we don't need to keep as many linebackers that aren't going to be special teams value, at which point Van Der Esch becomes kind of the odd man out. And another thing that I'll point out is that with the practice squad rules the way that they are now, you can keep up to 6 veteran players on the practice squad. So if Van Der Esch doesn't get picked up on waivers somewhere else, then I think that they would absolutely try to bring him back so that they can have him there for depth. They can elevate him on game day if they want. But I just don't see a spot for him to be on the actual roster.
Sturch, I know you have a very passionate sort of response to this, and we'll get there in a second, but I just want to make sure that I'm following the domino effect, or at least outlining the domino effect properly for Howman's roster, because the podcast audience may have forgotten because they can't see it, but the YouTube audience sees it. So you're only carrying 5 defensive ends, Howman. So again, like I think that what I loved at least about the Anthony Barr signing was it allowed all the more depth for when Micah Parsons is rushing the passer. So you're removing that depth obviously by moving on from Leighton Vander Esch. But if we again kind of follow the domino effect and confirm if I'm correct or just coming out of nowhere in terms of following your line of thought, Cowboys, effectively have more defensive ends than you have technically listed here because of the presences of Micah Parsons and Anthony Barr. And so then, okay, you're down at your safety spot, but to your point, you kind of have more linebackers than initially meets the eye by way of Jaron Kearse and Marquise Bell. And so could the argument not then be made through your sort of lens, Howman, that the people who kind of played Leighton Vander Esch off of your roster are Israel Mukwamu, who has helped stabilize the safety position, and Marquise Bell by his way of becoming a light version, LITE, of Jaron Kearse? Am I following your domino effect properly?
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, Dan Quinn has talked a lot about how he wants that position versatility. And I mean, he got it in Micah Parsons. He's got it now in Barr. Kearse last year fit that to a T, and that's where we're kind of seeing there's other players that you want to keep, and Van Der Esch isn't I don't think will be on the field as much to where he can offer that kind of value.
Sturch, you again have been holding back for a while. So nobody else had the same sort of response that you did to Van Der Esch's exclusion here. How do you feel about this?
It's not that deep, really. Jabril Cox, while everybody's high on him, and right, he's coming off injury and all this other stuff, and everybody's like, okay, Anthony Barr, and don't forget Anthony Barr is 8 years into the league, you know what I mean? So he's not the same Anthony Barr that I personally wanted in 14. Don't get me wrong, I think we struck gold with 14's roster, but what I'm saying is, in what world are we living in where LVE is not better than both of those guys? I think Van Der Esch's 2021 back end of that season last year, he proved that, as much as people were low on him for a little while, he started really coming on. And I don't think you take away those snaps. I think you build on the momentum that he's a Cowboy. He's going to be a linebacker right next to Micah Parsons. So that's where, I mean, while I understand the logic, yes, he's not going to play any special teams. He's not going to be somebody running down, making tackles on the kickoff. We get that, right? But I just, based off of the tape and based off of what I've watched, Leighton Vander Esch right now is a better linebacker than Jabril Cox and Anthony Barr. That's why he's on my team, and that's why he's linebacker too.
Dan, you seem like you've been silently thinking. Did Howman sell you at all? Are you 1% buying this?
No, I'm not at all. I mean, I'll give him credit that's bold, and it takes a lot to make such a ludicrous, prediction like this. So props to, David for doing that. But no, I think it's the thing. I mean, why would you take a player like that? I mean, first off, he's costing them nothing, and he's playing well. He's coming off a year where he's one of the healthiest years he's had, and it's just it would. Another thing too is that we have to consider is how has he looked in the preseason? Well, there's your answer. They're not cutting this guy. So, I mean, if it was a situation where it's like, well, we're not really sure what we want to do with Leighton, then they're going to throw him out there and just, give him reps and answer those questions. But they've made their mind up because Van Der Esch is a valuable piece to the linebacker depth. So, no, that's crazy talk to me, David.
Tony, do you feel like, are you at least, hey, are you like of the mindset, you know what, Howman, let's get a drink, let's go to the porch, let's talk about it? Like, are you at least like that open to it, or are you just like, no way, dude, like I'm not going anywhere near this whatsoever?
I love Howman. He's my guy. But no, I just don't see it. I just don't see it happen. I am in the camp. I know Aiden did some research, and shout out to Aiden Davis on the First and 10 podcast. He was talking about how Leighton Van Esch in the back end after post bye week, he was playing at a top 10 level statistically in the linebacker position. So like Sturt said, I would like to build up on that. And the fact that they brought Anthony Barr in makes me feel really good about where this linebacker group is, especially if you're going to use Anthony Barr and Michael Parsons as, kind of rush ends and somebody that can kind of play hybrid positions. I feel some type of good about the fact that Leighton Van Esch can be that guy in the middle. Jabril Cox can be that guy in the middle, and let those guys be creative. I think there's value in having these linebackers that don't have to be multiple, right? We have some playmakers and we have some mismatches, but some traditional guys that can play downhill, that can, still break up the pass and kind of just be a cog in the middle. So Leighton Van Esch, I actually feel good about the prospects. I like the contract. I like the fact that he's on a prove-it deal, and I don't think I'm going to get rid of that just now.
Howman, last one on your roster. You're the only person who carried Alec Lindstrom. Your thoughts?
Well, the thinking behind that was just that, he's looked good in the preseason games that he's played. And now that you're probably moving Tyler Smith to left tackle, you've got Connor McGovern having to start, and Farniok's going to be in that kind of fullback role. You need a little more depth up there on the inside. So Lindstrom's a guy that they like. He can play center. They've tried him out at some of the guard spots too. And frankly, he was one of those guys that when he went undrafted was kind of a surprise because most people thought he was going to be a day 3 pick. So I think the talent is there, the value as a depth piece is there. And with this latest shakeup on the offensive line, he's somebody that's going to be kept along.
All right. So speaking of center, this is my 53-man roster, so that everyone can see. Again, Marquise Bell, apologies, an oversight. If I have to move on from somebody at this point, it's probably John Ridgway. In fact, that's my actually Howman. I didn't ask you and Dan who your 53rd players were. We can kind of cycle back there, but that would be my 53rd player. I think that he's, I won't say played poorly, but hasn't played well enough to where the Cowboys can't sneak him on to the practice squad. We have not discussed Matt Farniok. We all kind of have the same nucleus of offensive line. Again, Howman, the only person who had Alec Lindstrom. Sturch was the only person who left Matt Farniok off of their 53. I think it's important to talk about center. The Cowboys gave Connor McGovern work at center on Friday night. They're clearly not totally satisfied with Tyler Biadasz. They said literally as the draft ended that they were going to convert Matt Farniok to a center. We're sitting here talking about how this team has some problems at left tackle, at tackle in general. They have the only stable position on the offensive line is at guard, right guard, that is, with Zach Martin. Maybe you want to call both guard positions stable with Tyler Smith. This is maybe the least impressive offensive line I've seen in a decade for the Dallas Cowboys, and it's the shakiest. Like, even what they have is shaky. These are effectively just names on a roster. Is that fair to say, Tom?
You asking me about that?
That's what I meant when I said Tom. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was actually just going back and looking at the roster projections while you were on that, talking about it for a minute, trying to think. I think this kind of is a case of where we got caught up by the evolving situation with Tyron Smith going down, because if you look at most of the projections, except for Howman, you said had Lindstrom on, we kind of forgot about depth on the interior of the line. We were all focused on what was happening out at tackle and the changes that were going to happen. And they clearly, I think, have to have somebody else in the interior of the line. And I don't know they got them on the roster right now, because with losing McGovern as a depth piece, I think everybody came into this thinking McGovern and Farniok are your backups on the interior of the offensive line. Then all of a sudden, McGovern looks like he's going to be moving up to starting left guard. That just leaves a hole that I don't know if we can fill it, which makes Lindstrom suddenly make an awful lot of sense. And I think that may be a case of where David just kind of saw that, and a lot of us didn't catch it.
Wow. So Tom Howman is with you on your full 53-man roster prediction. Tom's ready to cut Leighton Vander Esch as well. Dan, on the BTB roundtable this past week, you mentioned your sort of level of doubt in what the Cowboys were dealing with at offensive line. That was prior to the Tyron Smith injury. Obviously, that happened on Wednesday night. To Tom's point, to all of our point, I mean, the depth, like literally the depth on this team is Josh Ball at tackle and Matt Farniok along the interior. That's it. And the Cowboys are kind of, building this house on top of itself, right? Because their plan is, well, Tyler Smith is our depth at left tackle. He can't be your depth. He can't play two positions at once. Connor McGovern is our depth at center. He can't be your depth. He can't play two positions at once. And so this is so foolishly, honestly built. There's zero hedging that has happened here to one of the most important parts of your team.
To be fair, just quick to interject. To be fair, yesterday before RJ went on his "everybody stop editing" stuff, I have to make graphics rant. I did have 2 free agent offensive linemen coming in, so I did have that, and I made a switch and I gave it to, I guess, the tight end. But I think that there's a case to be made that the Cowboys will add 2 offensive linemen and maybe 2 offensive linemen that could potentially be hybrids and play both in and out. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, I initially thought that. I think I even tweeted that they need to, but I don't think that anymore. And a couple things, and this is something that's worried me for probably a few weeks now. But I will say this, and I wanted to point this out about Josh Ball. I think that he's going to make the roster. As bad as he's been in the preseason, I still think that the Cowboys, they just don't, they have a lack of options. But we got to remember too, and we saw, and this, I don't know why this eluded me, but watching Weletsko play, and I was very impressed with Weletsko in that second half and when he played. I thought he did a very good job. And it shows you what they like in his length and also how smart he is. But two is we haven't seen Josh Ball play the right tackle spot, which is where he plays. And we talked about this, how the swing, that Terrence Steele is the pivot guy. So I don't know what the Cowboys' plan are, but is Terrence Steele at left tackle the answer? And you got Josh Ball. Maybe Josh Ball's better, on the right side. He's supposed to be. Dan,
the broadcast last night said they were going to swing Zach Martin out the left tackle. I almost threw up.
Not to interrupt you, Dan, but the problem is these are not conversations that you can have in the final week of August. That's the problem. It's sound for you to explain it or to kind of hypothesize along those lines, but you can't. You're past the point of no return. You have to live with what you have to lie in this bed that they've made this bed and they're forcing themselves. They're forcing everybody to lie in it, and it's silly. To your point, I think a lot of people, every one of us saw tweets on Friday night. Matt Weletsko looks better. Okay, so the plan now at swing tackle is this dude who has had fewer than a single hand's worth of practices at the NFL level, because that's what the situation. He returned from practice or from injury this past week. So all of a sudden we're and that's where Stephen Jones, Howman, I'm curious for your thoughts here, said after the game that pounded his chest, hyped up their own level of foresight, that Tyler Smith is the plan at left tackle here, despite the fact that upon drafting him they immediately placed him at left guard. Okay, great. Even if you believe that Tyler Smith is the plan, and I think to a large degree we all think that's maybe the best lemonade that you can make out of this mess, but if you do not make any kind of move, Howman, you are still going down the path of Josh Ball remaining your swing tackle, which was already, prior to Friday night, prior to the Tyron Smith injury, an unsatisfactory sort of thing. For whatever reason, they refuse to add any sort of thing and just believe in their guys. That's obviously the trope, to no end, or to no result. I don't know. Your thoughts?
I know I tweeted about this earlier in the week, but what I keep coming back to is my suspicion that this is all part of some kind of scheme by the Joneses, as putting all of this on Mike McCarthy, so that at the end of the year, if they don't get to that point where they need to, where they want to, that they can justify getting rid of him, essentially saying, we trusted your evaluation on Josh Ball, we trusted your evaluation on Matt Waletzko. We trusted that you could move Tyler Smith out to left tackle, and basically saying we put the ball in your court and it fell
The Josh
apart
ball in your court, to be clear.
The Josh ball in your court. Thank you.
I like that.
And so maybe that's just the cynic in me, but that's what I keep coming back to is maybe they're not really being as aggressive right now because they want to give McCarthy this opportunity to either sink or swim on his own. And if he pulls it off, then they look like a genius because they believed in their head coach. If he doesn't, then they can say, well, now we're going to go get somebody else. Maybe Sean Payton, maybe they'll promote Dan Quinn, whatever.
Lincoln Riley makes another move. Okay, I think
cynical drama, like garbage. This is garbage.
I know I speak for all of us in saying if the Cowboys are going to add anywhere, we all believe it's on the offensive line. We all on our 53-man roster predictions had free agent listed along the offensive line. Tom, Sturchio both intimated that you think multiple players could be added. So that being said, last question as we wrap up this 53-man roster prediction show. We're going to go through each one of you. We'll go in order. Tom, how will you feel if the Cowboys don't? If they do not add? Because that possibility exists. I mean, I know we're all like, surely they have to do this. They have to add somebody. But again, like we for 6 months we've been saying they got to add a receiver. They haven't added a receiver. I mean, they added Kevontae Turpin again. It's kind of a unique thing. If you want to give it to him, fine. They've got to add, a tackle. They have to add a swing tackle. They didn't. The only external addition of any kind that they've made along the offensive line is Matt Farniok. Although I guess Alec Lindstrom, to be fair to that point as well, but he was absent on 5 of our 53-man roster predictions. But to the point, Howman, maybe you were onto something. So that being said, we all believe they have to, but they have done nothing that they had to. So Tom, what will be your emotion? How will you feel if the Cowboys do not add any, and let's couch that by saying any serious linemen? Because if they just go out and add a body to be, kind of a show, to be another player on the roster so that they could have literally accomplished something and just trot out Tyler Smith at left tackle the way they want to, that's the same result. So miss me with this, they sign, Joe Smith. Hey, they went and did something. If they do not make a significant move here, Tom, how will you feel?
Yeah, you mean like if they sign Chaz Green as their answer out
that's
there?
That's what we talked about in the postgame show, like a Cam Irving, Cam Fleming, like somebody along those lines, just to satisfy, hey, we went and got a body to be part of our depth.
I will honestly feel like there's no chance the team and the coaching staff can do well enough to overcome the management of Jerry and Stephen Jones. That this is a long, Stephen Jones likes to think about the long term. If they don't address this, he's saying that long term, this team is just going to keep screwing up, and get a franchise quarterback and put him in a terrible situation and put more and more of the load on him. I just see that's going to happen, and it will basically be kind of depressing.
Sturch.
Based on who's out there, I'm not okay with just adding a body, right? I'm not okay with that. The problem I have now is what Tom just kind of alluded to. You put every single dollar into your star quarterback, and now you're going to have him running for his life the entire season. What good is that going to do? We've already evaluated Dak Prescott enough to pay him all this money. What good is he if he's on his ass the entire time? You know what I mean? It's just not a good situation to be in. The Cowboys have to be aware of that. The Cowboys, and while, everybody makes fun of, or at least pokes the due diligence or the cat boy or whatever you want to call Stephen Jones at this point, I just feel like they would be just almost like a parent who leaves their kid on a doorstep, just neglect. Just this is your baby. This is your product. This is the Dallas Cowboys. You want us to be successful this year? Well, guess what? I don't know if anybody's told you this. I don't know if anybody's told the Joneses this, but this game starts and ends up front. You got to do something. You can't mess around. You saw the first quarter last night, and it didn't look that great. Guys are getting pushed back. So clearly we don't have the talent on the roster right now. Go get the talent. Stop being cheap. They got $10 million to spend. Go give 3 of it to somebody who can actually make a difference.
Tony, before we get to you, Tom, you had a point.
Yeah, and not only do they have the $40 million quarterback, but they're trying to blame his salary for why they can't get depth on the team. It's, it drives you crazy.
Along those lines, Tom, we're like a 2-6 record away from them turning on Zeke, right? Well, and in full hypocrisy, right? Like, well, we spent all this money, Zeke's got to make a couple guys miss. You know what I mean? Like, if Zeke's making all this money, and that, again, it would be hilarious and hypocritical and stupid. But that timeline does exist. Tony, to set you up, last night or Friday night, because we're posting this on Sunday, Stephen Jones spoke after the game, and I haven't heard this, so the inflection I'm adding is my own interpretation. His response about Tyler Smith playing tackle said, "What did he play in college? I mean, it's not foreign to him to stand out there and be a left tackle." So, again, Stephen Jones now minimizing playing left tackle in the NFL to standing out there. But Tony, you quote tweeted this and said, quote, "This is just horrendous, truly. The kid," I love when you call people kids, Tony, you're a kid yourself, "hasn't lined up at tackle since June," in all caps. "And you're telling us he's the best option to protect Dak Prescott week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Wake up. This is incompetence." Tony.
You've never set me up for an answer better in my life, because even if you didn't mention that, I was still going to say it here. Like, every single time Stephen Jones and Jerry Jones have spoken this offseason, at least to me, you guys can feel differently. It comes off as a tone like, we know what we're doing. You guys don't know what you're doing. We're handling it the way that, look at us, we're champions, we've won before, like, you guys don't understand what it takes. And that comment right there made me so upset, because he's almost, in my vision, he's sitting up there in the suite, he's had a good time. He's probably had a few soft drinks, and then he goes down and talks to the media, and he's like, well, "What did he play, guys? Like, come on, he's played tackle before, right?" And it's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we forgot. Like, we forgot he played tackle. Now everything's good." So for me, incompetence is the start of it. It's gross negligence to me. And if they don't address this position, and I'm not trying to be like too over the top about this, but how they handle this position before week 1 will tell me a lot about how they feel about this season. Like, I know it's just one move, but if you're going to trot out Dak Prescott and say, "Go ahead, bro, like, make it work. Good luck back there, though. Like, you only got about a half a second to throw this football, so good luck." And it's just, to me, it's one of the most frustrating parts, that maybe one of the frustrating things I've ever had in my life, covering this team. Yeah, bro, I told you I ain't got much of a life. My life's been good, man. I'll tell you that. So
that's the one downfall, is the Joneses right now of your life. Everything's good.
Jerry,
Wife's good. House is good. It's just the Joneses are ruining everything for everybody.
99 problems and 98 of them are Jerry Jones. So yeah. So there we go.
Tony, I think that was well said. Like, again, like the entire collection of Cowboys brass and media and fan base was like, "Oh, hell yeah, we forgot. Like, great point, dude." Like, thank you. Wow. I feel so much better.
Is comparison to the NFL.
It would, but to that point, Tony, I mean, and like people say all the time, like, they should be pressed by this. Like, somebody, I mean, I'm like saying this tongue in cheek. Somebody should have said, "Well, what'd Zach Martin play in college?" Right? Like, if you're if you're willing to go down that line of thought, like, why are you only they say things and apply them only in certain circumstances to confirm their own sort of narratives. Dan, if the Cowboys do not add, and again, we all agree here, a serious option at tackle, if it's just a all due respect to Cam Irving, Cam Fleming, Chaz Green, if it's somebody cut from that cloth, how will you feel?
Well, it's interesting to say that, because it's going to be exactly that.
Right.
If they sign someone, it's going to be, Grabs pointed this out, and props to Landon McCool for saying this. But there's the tackles fall in two groups: guys that can go out there and stand alone, and guys that need help. And the chances of getting a standalone guy are gone. I mean, we had that chance when Rashawn Slater was available, and we passed on that for Micah, which, no problem with that. But now we're looking at guys that are going to need help. It doesn't matter. But how will I feel? I will feel very scared. I don't know that I really wanted them to do this sooner, only because while they have had such success, and we have to give them props for the Ty Nsekes and the Cam Irvings and Cam Flemings and Cam whatevers, but they get these guys in, and we see that they're good, and they're good enough, and then we feel good about it. Now we're just going to go sign like a Darrell Williams, who I would like to see them sign. But what if he's not? Because there's so many of them that aren't, and now we're like left with a big problem. So that's the part that makes me most unsettled, is that they're like have waited this long and they haven't got this fixed, and we really don't know what's going on. And I tell you what, they are leaving Prescott at the doorstep, and if if Dak can't do what Dak can do, I mean, this whole team, the whole season is going to be in turmoil. So yeah, that's how I feel.
Just want to thank Dan real quick for the newest name of one of my fantasy football teams is definitely going to be the Cam Whatevers, just because that was a fantastic drop, by the way.
Howman, the Cowboys with this situation feel like Sturch has a little girl, and so maybe he experiences this, like a little kid who is like, everybody look at me, like, you know, or like, look at my dance, look at my whatever. And it's just like the worst dance you've ever seen, or it's like the worst song. Like, well, not in Sturch's daughter's case, obviously.
It's the best dance
like,
I've ever seen. All right,
the worst song that's ever been sung. But because it's a little kid, you're like, wonderful, great job, sweetheart. You know, you're like, there's all this like fake praise that comes from a place of love. But you know, like if like the Oscars or the Tonys or whatever were like judging this, it'd be terrible. You know what I'm saying? But like that's what they've done. They have not only painted themselves into this corner, but they were like, hey guys, we're gonna paint ourselves into this corner. Everybody look. And now they're here, and then they're gonna be in this corner, and they're gonna say, well, what the hell? Why did y'all let us do this? Like, why are, you know, we're in this corner now. Somebody help us. So how will you feel, Howman, if they just if they follow the status quo?
Well, I'm going to feel a little gross right now because I am going to take the side of the Cowboys front office for
wow. Okay, go ahead.
And I mean, I will preface this by saying, like, I've pretty much disagreed with all of their decisions they've made this offseason, whether it was getting rid of Cooper, Collins. I wanted them to keep Connor Williams. But I look at the approach that they're taking, especially with this offense and how it relates to their offensive line. And I think that they're probably not in as bad of a situation as we all think. And obviously, you know, a lot of this is exacerbated by the fact that Tyron Smith is going to be out for a really long time. We all hate to see him go down. Having a rookie left tackle who just spent the last 3 months learning a completely different position is not ideal. But I look at what we've seen in joint practices in preseason, and it kind of lines up with what we've seen with their overall approach, which is a run-heavy approach, a lot of 12 personnel, a lot more play action. And so with that, what you are really looking for in your offensive linemen are guys who are going to be much better at run blocking. You look down this line, Tyler Smith is much better when he's run blocking. Connor McGovern, Tyler Biotish are at their best when they're run blocking, Terrence Steele especially. So if they're able to, you know, really make that work and commit to that kind of approach, and we've seen it in preseason, the run blocking when those guys have been in has looked good. I'm not saying that it's going to suddenly make their pass protection that much better, but it does help. It helps when, you know, defenses are playing the run much more often. When you have that play action, we know Dak is really great when he's on that play action, when he's rolling out to the side. That's another way that you can kind of take some of that pressure off of him. So I think that it's obviously a bad situation, but I think that the way that they've built this offense for this year actually plays to some of their strengths that they do still have left on this roster. And also, I think that it's entirely possible that Tyler Smith ends up being a huge hit. You know, just last year, we were all saying, like, Micah Parsons was a terrible pick. He's not going to work out. Like, this was a terrible selection, and he ended up being, you know, just absolutely phenomenal. People were comparing him to Lawrence Taylor halfway through the year. And, you know, so I'm not saying we should have blind trust in the front office, but Will McClay is the guy that is doing all this scouting. He very clearly knows what he's doing, and they trust in him and his approach. And so I think that we should be, you know, waiting to see, because Tyler Smith may make us all look really stupid in a few weeks.
What are you doing? What are you doing at 3:15? You want to meet me at the in the schoolyard or something like that? Because comments like that is violent. Like, that is just, what are you doing? Like, come on, man.
I thought that was really
it was
rosy
well
said and positive. I mean, like, lo and behold, the guy who cut Leighton Vander Esch came in and kind of, you know, just landed the plane. Wow, that's by the way, Danny Phantom noted his 53rd player is Terrell Basham. Howman, who was yours, just quickly, so we make sure we get that on record.
Probably the 19th offensive lineman.
CJ Goodwin.
Yeah, I did not carry him myself. We didn't talk about that, but I just feel like, I mean, I set that up. I think Nashawn Wright kind of handles that. I'd rather have that roster spot elsewhere. Okay, anybody have any final thoughts? Any final things they want to get off their chest? Now is the time to do so.
Howman Man, I'm still kind of bugged out about the Leighton Vander Esch thing, but then you go out and say you're about to have dinner and lunch and all sorts of meals with the Joneses right now, supporting everything you've done. Well, I'm all for Will McClay and all the stuff that he's done in the draft. That doesn't mean that, he's evaluating players on the field right this second. That's up to the, McCarthy's of the world. And those guys, they see, here's the thing. My estimation and this could be completely off the wall. But what if Mike McCarthy is going to Stephen Jones and saying, hey, I need a tackle now, yesterday I needed a tackle. And Stephen's yeah, we got you. Close the door.
What?
I
think the answer to that, Sturch, is similarly to how we got the Bleacher Report Mike McCarthy expose after his time in Green Bay. If this goes south, I mean, we all share, Howman, you outlined it, but we all share a similar belief that the Cowboys are setting this up. I don't see why that's necessary, but to sort of set McCarthy up as the fall guy, there is a Mike McCarthy sit down with Mina Kimes or something that we are, 7 to 8 months away from, that is going to generate some incredible content about the Joneses and how, whatever. Because, in Mike McCarthy's defense, and look, I don't supremely believe in Mike McCarthy, but I do think he's being dealt a raw hand. I wrote this past week at the site, the offensive line, when he made the comment about, I didn't actually watch every game, the starting offensive line that day was Tyron Smith, Connor Williams, Travis Frederick, Zach Martin, and Lyle Collins. Now, Travis went on to retire. Maybe he had some idea that was coming, but still, I mean, by December, when we're told that Tyron Smith is supposed to show up, Mike McCarthy will have coached 45 games with the Cowboys. Tyron Smith will have missed 31 of them at that point. I mean, he has not necessarily gotten to drive the Corvette that people, outlined this team to be. So that being said, he's waited a long time for this. He has had to deal with a lot of mess and a big circus that I think he would probably admit he underestimated. If we've learned anything, it's that the Dallas Cowboys job is very, very, very different from the Green Bay Packers job. And I think the only person in the world who truly can empathize with him right now is Jason Garrett, as funny as it is to say.
Well, I also see all right, look, while the Tyron Smith thing is incredibly bad, right? And we're all kind of we just got that gut feeling in our stomach, oh my God, our season just went up in smoke. The Green Bay Packers went 13-4 last year without their two right and left tackle. You know what I mean? And those are all world players too. Bakhtiari is one of the better left tackles in football. And I understand they got Aaron Rodgers, and that's fine. But if you look at that team right now, look at the Green Bay Packers, who are the darlings of the NFC coming into this year, one of them at least, they got a lesser team than the Cowboys do. The Cowboys got a lot of talent. You know what I mean? Dak Prescott, to me, top 10 quarterback. Zeke, y'all can bash him as all as you want. I still think he's going to be in the top 5, top 6 rushing in the league, even after losing
of course he is. They're going to give him 1,000 opportunities to carry the ball.
Well, I'm just saying there's talent on this team. And while I understand that, the world or Cowboys Nation is up in arms with the offensive line situation, I think it's very apparent that, a lot of these guys are going to make and earn their paychecks this year. And I think they can. I'm not writing the season off as a total L, but I do hope, we're all hoping here, except for Howman, however, who's sipping coffee with the Joneses, that the Cowboys do address something within the next couple of days.
Well, I would kind of build off of that point.
Go ahead, Howman.
Sorry. Sturch, what you mentioned with the Packers and their tackles last year, you look through the Packers, even back in the McCarthy days. I mean, they were having injuries on the offensive line. Most of those offensive linemen that were starters were not first round picks, were not second round picks. So McCarthy in his time at Green Bay, and Joe Philbin was also there for several portions of that time there too. They were finding guys on the offensive line, whether it was, in the in the off season, or if it was as the season was going on, they were finding guys that, came up and contributed and stepped up when they needed to. And McCarthy always mentions the year that he won the Super Bowl, they had I forget the exact number, but they had a bunch
75
of guys
players.
Yeah, half the team was on injured reserve by the time they got to the Super Bowl. So, he has a history of being able to succeed when guys go down, and especially on the offensive line, being able to, cobble together pieces. And it's not always about, everyone talks about get the best 5 out there, but sometimes it's just about having the right 5 out there that can work together and have that continuity. I think McCarthy and Joe Philbin know that from their time in Green Bay, and I think that could play a big part here in Dallas.
See, look, all podcasts long, you're sitting there with the LVE stuff, and now right here I'm doing the Jack Nicholson, keep going. This is good. You've redeemed yourself, Howman. There you go, bro.
I was gonna say something along the lines of Howman as we close here. I think a huge problem with like people in life in general is that we just like live off of like the past. Like we assume things that happened in the past are going to happen to us. Like, oh, last time I went to this like burger place, there's a great How I Met Your Mother episode about like chasing perpetual history with a burger that Marshall was looking for. And a great friend of mine, Ari Temkin, he hosts the Cowboys pre and post game show on 105.3 The Fan. He once said to me that he thinks that Dan Bailey kind of ruined Jason Garrett. Like Dan Bailey exacerbated the conservativeness of Jason Garrett because of how consistent Dan Bailey was. That kind of, sorry Dan, forced Jason Garrett to kind of rely on that more than maybe he would have conventionally if Dan Bailey weren't so amazing. And to Howman, to your point, I mean, I think Josh Ball is a prime example of like we've done it before, and I think Terrence Steele's success from year 1 to year 2 confirmed those priors. Hey, we're good at this. We can take any like piece of clay and we can mold something wonderful out of it. We're going to do it with Josh Ball. And my problem isn't necessarily assuming that mindset. It's foregoing other resources that you had just to do that. Like that's pride at that point in time. That's not just history that you're chasing. That's pride. That's saying we have all this salary cap space, but we don't have to use it because we're Mike McCarthy and Joe Philbin. We can scrap things together. We can make this car work. And I think that clearly is already potentially going to cost them. Although Sturchio, you're right, obviously the season hasn't been played. Tony?
Yeah, I mean, for me, ultimately, it's perplexing, just the whole situation, right? I feel really good about some of the things we saw this whole preseason, right? I think we confirmed some priors, like we said last night in the Twitter space. There's some guys that we feel really good about that went out there and kind of consistently played like that. But then the question marks are still consistently there too. I don't sit here comfortable. I'm not gonna do the whole situation, but I'm not here comfortable with what the offensive line is going to look like. I'm very worried about Tyler Smith. I think this offense doesn't have to be prolific. They just have to be able to be proficient, and I think they could be good. And I don't know how bad of an offensive line this is going to actually shake out to be. We already know that Connor McGovern is somebody that is a better right guard than a left guard. So it's just, we don't have to go through the whole line again. We pretty covered it in detail here, but there are just a lot of question marks, and we have a few days to try to figure this out before they lock down in Tampa Bay. And as it's currently constructed, like I said in my last kind of run-on sentence, was if they don't make anything go on or do something better here, it's I don't know how I feel about it going forward.
Tom, give us a line to close out on. It could be optimistic, pessimistic. It could be life advice, whatever you want, but send us home.
It probably doesn't matter how it all turns out. We're still going to somehow find a way to be a fan of the Dallas Cowboys.
Well said.